Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this or watched a truth surface that changed everything you thought you knew, please leave a comment, and subscribe to Narrative Nest. I used to believe that families fall apart slowly, like wood rotting from the inside. I was wrong. Sometimes it happens in a single breath, a single sentence, a single look. The night my husband noticed our son's eyes was one of those moments. The house was full, too full with the clatter of plates and the hum of voices that tried too hard to sound normal. It was my sister's birthday, or maybe it was just an excuse to gather, to pretend that we were still the kind of family that gathered. Our son, Daniel, was sitting on the living room rug with a toy truck, pushing it back and forth, his laughter bright and careless. The light from the lamp caught his face just right, and that's when my husband, Aaron, froze. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowed, then widened, as if he'd seen a ghost. He walked closer to Daniel, crouched down, and tilted his chin up with two fingers. I remember the room going quiet, the way it does before a storm. Aaron's voice came out tight, controlled, but sharp enough to cut. "Look at his eyes," he said, not to me, but to everyone. "Look at them." I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to say something gentle, something dismissive, something that would keep the evening intact. Daniel's eyes were blue, a clear, unmistakable blue. Aaron's eyes were brown, mine were brown. Our parents' eyes, our grandparents' eyes, every old photo on every shelf, brown. We joked about it before, brushed it aside as a fluke, a trick of the light, a recessive gene that had finally decided to show itself. But Aaron wasn't joking now. His jaw clenched, his hands shook. "You think I'm stupid?" he said, standing up. "You think I wouldn't notice?" The word stupid hung in the air like smoke. My sister shifted uncomfortably. My mother cleared her throat. Daniel kept playing, blissfully unaware that his world was about to fracture. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, not because I was afraid of being accused, but because I knew where this was going. I'd known it would come someday. I just hadn't expected it to be like this, in front of everyone, with our child between us like evidence on the floor. Aaron turned to me, his eyes burning. "Whose is he?" he demanded, "because he's not mine." That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't about infidelity, not really. This was about fear, a fear that had been living in Aaron long before I met him, long before Daniel was born. I saw it now, raw and unguarded, pushing past anger into something older and darker. I stood there, hands clenched, feeling the weight of years press down on me. The truth I carried wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It wasn't something you could toss into a conversation and walk away from. It had roots, deep and tangled, reaching back into a past that had been deliberately buried. I had promised myself I'd protect Daniel from it as long as I could. I had promised myself I'd choose the right moment. This wasn't it, and yet the moment chose us. "Get out," Aaron yelled suddenly, his voice cracking. "Get out of my house. He has blue eyes." The room erupted. My mother gasped. My sister started talking all at once. Someone reached for Daniel. I stepped forward instinctively, pulling my son into my arms, feeling his small body tense against me as he sensed the chaos. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Stop," I said. "You're scaring him." Aaron laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "I'm scaring him? You brought this into my house," he said, pointing at Daniel. "You lied to me." I didn't deny it, not because I was guilty of what he was accusing me of, but because the truth was too big to fit into a denial. Instead, I took a breath and said the words that would change everything. "I didn't lie about him being yours," I said quietly, "but you don't know the whole story." That made him pause, just for a second, enough for me to see the flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew, on some level, that there was more. That scared him more than any imagined betrayal. "What story?" he demanded. "What could possibly explain this?" I looked around the room, at the faces that had known me my whole life, at the child in my arms who trusted me completely. I thought of the envelope tucked away in my bag, the one I'd carried for weeks without opening in front of anyone. The test results, proof in black and white of a truth I'd suspected for years but hadn't wanted to confirm. A truth that explained the blue eyes, yes, but also explained Aaron's fear. I didn't plan to do this tonight, and I didn't plan to do it like this, but if we're going to tear this family apart, we're going to do it with the truth. Aaron's face went pale. What are you talking about? I set Daniel down with my sister, my hands lingering on her shoulders for a moment longer than necessary. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. I didn't open it yet. I didn't have to. I'd memorized every word. These are test results, I said. They don't show what you think they show. He scoffed. A paternity test? He snapped. You really went there? No, I said. Not just paternity. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't anticipation. It was dread. He took a step back, as if he already knew he didn't want to hear what was coming. I saw his mother's face in my mind then, the way she'd avoided certain topics, the way she'd changed the subject whenever Aaron asked about his childhood. I remembered the strange gaps in his medical history, the stories that didn't quite line up. I'd brushed them aside, too busy building a life to question the foundation. Open it, Aaron said hoarsely. Go on, prove whatever you think you're proving. I didn't open it. I met his eyes instead. This isn't about proving anything. It's about understanding who we are and where we come from. He shook his head, backing away. No, he whispered, don't. That was when I knew. He'd always known, at least enough to be afraid, enough to hope the past would stay buried, enough to believe that as long as nothing challenged the story he'd been told, everything would be fine. Our son's blue eyes had challenged it, and the truth was no longer willing to stay quiet. I held up the envelope. These results showed genetic markers, lineage, things that don't disappear just because someone wants them to. Aaron's voice was barely audible. You went behind my back. I went behind the lies for our son. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on my chest. I realized then that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The secret was already halfway out, and once it was free, it would change the shape of our family forever. I took another breath, steadying myself. Daniel's eyes, I said softly, are just the beginning. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for the rest of the sentence, as if the truth were a rope I was slowly pulling out of my chest, knot by knot. Aaron's hands were clenched at his sides now, his knuckles white, his whole body braced like he was preparing for impact. I'd seen that posture before, usually when he was cornered by something he didn't want to face. I used to think it was stubbornness. That night, I understood it was survival. When Daniel was born, I began, my voice quieter than I expected. The nurse made a comment about his eyes. She said they were unusually light for a newborn. I remember smiling and shrugging it off. Babies change, everyone says that. But something in me didn't let it go. I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. As he grew, people kept commenting. Strangers at the park, teachers at daycare. Where did he get those eyes? They'd ask. I'd laugh. I'd say, must be a recessive gene. Aaron let out a short, bitter laugh. That's what you told me. That's what I told myself, I said. But every time I looked at him, really looked, I felt this pull, like there was a question I was avoiding. The room was still. Even my sister had stopped fidgeting. I could hear Daniel's small voice from the other room humming to himself, blissfully unaware that his parents were dismantling their lives piece by piece. I started with a simple ancestry test for me. I told myself it was just curiosity, something fun. But when the results came back, there were gaps, markers that didn't line up with my family history. It bothered me more than it should have. Aaron's eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand. So you tested him, he said flatly. Yes, I admitted. Not because I doubted you, but because I needed to understand him. All of him. His jaw tightened. You had no right. Maybe not, but I had a responsibility. That word hung there. Responsibility. It felt heavier than blame. He looked away, toward the window, like he was trying to escape the room without moving his feet. The results didn't come back the way I expected. They didn't say Daniel wasn't yours. In fact, they confirmed he is biologically connected to you. My mother gasped softly. Aaron snapped his head back toward me. Then what is this? He demanded, gesturing wildly. What are you implying? I took a step closer to him, lowering my voice even though everyone could hear. They showed something else, something about your genetic profile. He shook his head, panic flashing across his face. No, he said again, those tests get things wrong all the time. Not like this. These weren't anomalies, they were patterns. I finally opened the envelope then, pulling out the papers I knew by heart. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't need to. Aaron, I said gently, the test indicates that you carry markers consistent with donor-conceived individuals, specifically experimental genetic lineages from the late 80s and early 90s. The words sounded clinical, distant, like they belonged to someone else's life, but the effect on Aaron was immediate. He staggered back, bumping into the coffee table, his face drained of color. That's impossible, he whispered. My parents... Your parents never told you everything. Silence crashed down harder than before. My sister covered her mouth. My mother sank into a chair. I realized then that the secret wasn't just Aaron's. It belonged to all of us now. You're saying, then he stopped. He looked at me like a child lost in a crowd. You're saying I'm not who I think I am? I'm saying your origins were engineered, I said carefully. You weren't conceived naturally. You were part of a program, one that altered certain traits. His laugh this time was hollow, broken. Blue eyes, he murmured. They wanted blue eyes. Yes, and other things, intelligence markers, physical resilience. It was all very secretive. Most records were sealed, some destroyed. He stared at the floor, shaking his head over and over. My mother, he said. She used to panic whenever I got sick, overreact to everything. She never let me see my medical records. I nodded. She was protecting a secret she didn't know how to explain, or maybe one she was told never to explain. The realization hit him in waves. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his anger drained out and left something raw behind. So when I saw his eyes, he said slowly, it wasn't about you. No, I said softly, it was about you recognizing something you were taught to fear. He closed his eyes. I always felt like there was something wrong with me, he admitted, like I didn't belong anywhere, like if people knew, I don't even know what they'd know. I wanted to reach for him, to bridge the space between us, but I didn't move. This was his reckoning, not mine. The program was shut down, I continued. Officially, it never existed, but the genetic markers don't disappear. They pass on. Daniel inherited the eye color. That's all. He's healthy. He's normal. He's just honest. Aaron looked up at me sharply. Honest? I said, his body tells the truth, even when people don't. That seemed to break him something. He sank on the couch, burying his face in his hands. I accused you, he said hoarsely. I told you to get out. I treated my own son like a mistake. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. Fear makes us cruel, but it doesn't have to define us. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mother cleared her throat. Aaron, she said gently, your mother and I, we suspected something years ago. She never confirmed it, but there were doctors, contracts. She was scared. He looked up, eyes red. You knew? We knew enough to know it wasn't ours to tell. Maybe that was wrong. Aaron laughed weakly. Seems like everyone knew except me. I stepped closer then, finally placing my hand on his arm. You know now, I said, and you still get to choose who you are. He looked at my hand, then at me.
"And Daniel?" he asked. "What does this make him?" I smiled through my tears. "It makes us our son, nothing more, nothing less." From the other room, Daniel ran in, holding his toy truck, his blue eyes bright and curious. "Daddy, why are you sad?" Aaron looked at him, really looked, and something softened in his face. He opened his arms, and Daniel ran into them without hesitation. I watched them hold each other, the past and the future colliding in that simple embrace. I knew then that the secret, once revealed, didn't have to destroy us, but it would change us. And change, I was learning, is its own kind of truth.
Watching Aaron hold Daniel should have brought relief, but instead it stirred something restless inside me. The embrace was real, yes, but it was fragile, like glass freshly cracked and pretending to be whole. Secrets don't vanish just because they're spoken aloud. They linger, echoing in quiet moments, reshaping memories you thought were settled. That night, after everyone left and the house finally fell silent, the weight of what I'd revealed settled over us in a new way. It wasn't explosive anymore. It was heavy, constant. Aaron didn't say much as he carried Daniel to bed. I stood in the hallway and listened to his voice soften as he read a story, the same one he'd read 100 times before. The normalcy of it almost hurt. When he came out, he didn't look at me right away. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stood there staring at the sink like it might offer answers. "I need to know everything," he said finally, his back still turned to me. "Not just what the test says, everything you know." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I'll tell you," I said, "but some of it I learned after we were already married." He turned then, his expression tired rather than angry. "How long?" he asked. "How long have I suspected?" I corrected gently. "Since before Daniel was born." "How long have I known for sure?" "A few months." He pressed his lips together, absorbing that. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I didn't think you were ready," I said honestly, "and I wasn't sure I was either." He sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "My whole life makes more sense now," he said quietly, "and somehow less." I sat across from him. "Tell me what you're thinking." He laughed without humor. "I'm thinking about all the times my father looked at me like a stranger, about how my mother hovered, controlled everything. I thought it was love. Maybe it was guilt." "Or fear," I said. "Yes," he agreed, "fear that if I ever knew, I'd hate them." I reached for his hand. This time he didn't pull away. "Do you?" He considered it. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I don't hate you, and I don't hate him." He nodded toward the hallway where Daniel slept. "I was afraid, that's what that was. Not rage, fear." That admission felt like a small miracle. Over the next few days, the truth seeped into every corner of our lives. Aaron started asking questions about the test, about the program, about whether there were others like him. I shared what I found: fragmented articles, sealed court cases, whispers on obscure forums where adult donor-conceived children searched for answers. Nothing was concrete. Everything felt deliberately blurred. "You think there are siblings," he said one night. "I think it's possible," I said. "The program didn't focus on families. It focused on outcomes." He exhaled slowly. "All those people out there," he murmured, "pieces of the same experiment." It haunted him. I could see it in the way he stared at his reflection longer than usual, in the way he flinched when strangers commented on Daniel's eyes. The blue that once seemed like a curiosity now felt like a beacon, drawing attention he didn't want. One afternoon, Aaron's mother called. He let it ring 3 times before answering. I watched his face shift as she spoke. Surprise, then anger, then something like resignation. When he hung up, he didn't say anything right away. "She wants to come over," he said finally. She says it's time. My stomach tightened. Are you ready? No, he said, but I don't think I ever will be. She arrived the next morning, small and tense, carrying a folder clutched to her chest like armor. When she saw Daniel, her face softened, and for a moment she looked like any grandmother. Then she looked at Aaron, and the years between them filled with unsaid words. I never wanted you to find out like this, she said, sitting down heavily. Like what? Aaron asked. Like the truth existing at all? She flinched. We were promised anonymity, safety. They said you'd never know. Who's they? I asked. She glanced at me, then back at her son. Doctors, investors, men who talked about the future like it was something they could design. She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were old contracts, medical summaries, consent forms signed under pressure. Aaron leaned forward, scanning them, his face hardening with every page. You signed away my identity, he said quietly. She shook her head, tears spilling over. I signed so I could have you. They told me it was the only way. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was thick with grief rather than shock. Aaron closed the folder. You should have trusted me, he said. I was afraid you'd feel exactly like you do now, she whispered. He looked at Daniel, playing on the floor, then back at her. I don't feel broken, he said. I feel lied to. That moment, something shifted. The blame no longer pointed in one direction. It spread outward, touching systems, choices, generations. The secret had been born out of ambition and fear, and it had survived because silence was easier than truth. After she left, Aaron sat quietly for a long time. I don't know how to carry this, he said. You don't have to carry it alone, I replied. Weeks passed, life resumed its routines, but everything felt slightly off-kilter, like a picture hung just crooked enough to notice. Aaron started therapy. I watched him learn how to talk about himself without the old assumptions. Daniel grew, oblivious, joyful, his laughter filling spaces that fear once occupied. And yet, under it all, I felt a tension building, because secrets, even revealed ones, have consequences, and the truth we uncovered was bigger than our family. It had roots in a world that didn't want to be exposed. The test results had started something, and I could feel, deep down, that the story wasn't finished.
The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded neatly and slipped through the mail slot like it belonged there. It didn't have a return address, just my name, written in careful, deliberate handwriting. I remember standing in the hallway for a long moment, staring at it, my heart beating faster than it should have over something so ordinary. Ever since the truth came out, I'd developed a sensitivity to small disruptions. Nothing felt neutral anymore. I opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel napped and Aaron was at work. The letter was brief. No greeting, no signature, just a few lines that made my hands tremble. I know you've seen the results. You're not the only one. Be careful what you uncover next. That was it. No explanation, no threat exactly, just a warning. I read it 3 times, hoping the meaning would soften with repetition. It didn't. When Aaron came home, I showed it to him without a word. He read it, then sat back slowly in his chair. He said, "They found us." I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Whoever didn't want this getting out," he replied. "Whoever told my mother it would all stay buried." We didn't call the police. There was nothing to report, really. No crime, no names. Just fear creeping back into our home, quiet and unwelcome. That night, Aaron barely slept. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing change with every passing hour, wondering what it meant to know the truth when the truth didn't want to be known. A week later, another letter came, this one addressed to Aaron. short again, clinical. Some origins are best left unexplored, for your family's sake. That was when Aaron made his decision. He said, "I'm done being quiet," his voice steady in a way I hadn't heard before. "They took my choice once. They don't get to take it again." He began reaching out to researchers, to journalists, to online groups of donor-conceived adults who shared stories eerily similar to his own. Patterns emerged. Programs shut down abruptly, records sealed, families paid for silence, children raised without knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. One woman we spoke to cried as she described discovering she had dozens of half-siblings. A man talked about unexplained health issues that doctors couldn't trace because his genetic history was incomplete. The more Aaron listened, the more he understood that his blue-eyed son wasn't an anomaly. He was evidence. But with every email sent, every call returned, the tension at home grew. I worried about Daniel, about what it meant to raise a child in the shadow of a secret powerful enough to scare grown men into sending anonymous letters. Aaron assured me he'd protect us, but I could see the weight settling onto his shoulders. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Aaron turned to me with a look I hadn't seen before, resolved but afraid. He said, "There's a reporter. She wants to tell the story, not just mine, all of them." My chest tightened. "What does that mean for us?" I asked quietly. He said, "It means names, faces, history." "And Daniel?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "We can protect him, change details, keep him out of it." I wanted to believe that was possible. I wanted to believe that truth could be controlled once released. But I'd learned better by then. Truth has a way of finding its own shape. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Once it's out, there's no putting it back." He nodded. "I know, but if we don't speak, someone else will, or no one will, and then this keeps happening." The interview happened over several hours in a small office that smelt like coffee and old paper. I sat beside Aaron, listening as he told his story, his childhood, the missing pieces, the moment he saw his blue eyes and felt his world crack open. The reporter listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, never rushing him. When she turned to me, I spoke about what it's like to love someone whose identity was shaped by secrets, about the cost of silence, about the fear of telling a child the truth about where they come from. When it was over, Aaron looked both lighter and more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. He said, "Whatever happens now, at least it's honest." The article was published 2 weeks later. It didn't use our last name. It blurred details, but it was unmistakable. The response was immediate. Messages poured in, supportive, angry, grateful. Some accused Aaron of exaggerating. Others thanked him for saying what they'd been too afraid to say themselves. Then the calls started. Lawyers, advocacy groups, people claiming to represent institutions that no longer existed. One voicemail left late at night made my blood grow cold. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. This will not end well." Aaron deleted it without comment, but I saw his hand shake. Daniel sensed the change, even if he didn't understand it. He became clingier, more sensitive to raised voices. One night, as I tucked him in, he touched my face and asked, "Are you sad, Mama?" I smiled and kissed his forehead. "Sometimes," I said, "but I'm brave." He nodded solemnly. "Daddy's brave, too." Yes, I thought, and bravery, I was learning, often comes at a price. As the weeks passed, the story grew beyond us. Investigations were opened, old records were requested. The past, once buried, was being dug up by people with sharper tools and less patience. And in the middle of it all was our family, trying to live normal lives while the ground beneath us shifted. One night, Aaron came home later than usual, his face pale. He said, "They confirmed it.
The program, it was real and illegal. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. What happens now? He looked at me, eyes steady but tired. He said, "Now we see how far the truth can go."
Once the investigation became public, our lives were no longer just our own. Reporters parked down the street. Neighbors who'd barely nodded at us before suddenly wanted to talk. Some brought casseroles and whispered words of support. Others avoided eye contact entirely, as if controversy were contagious. I learned quickly how isolating visibility can be. Being seen is not the same as being understood. Aaron tried to shield Daniel from it all, insisting on routine. Same bedtime, same morning walks, same stories before sleep. But children sense disruption the way animals sense storms. Daniel began asking questions he'd never asked before. "Why do people look at us?" he asked once, peering out the window at a woman holding a camera. I told him people were curious, that sometimes curiosity looks like staring. It felt like a half-truth, but it was the best I could manage. Behind the scenes, things were escalating. Aaron met with investigators who wanted detailed timelines, genetic data, names of doctors long retired or conveniently deceased. Each meeting peeled back another layer of his past, forcing him to relive moments he'd once dismissed as quirks or bad luck. I watched him come home from those sessions hollowed out, as if parts of him were being examined under a microscope and returned with labels he didn't recognize. "They asked about my health," he said one night, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "Things I never thought were connected. The migraines, the heart murmur, even my height." I reached for his hand. "What did they say?" "That the modifications were experimental, that long-term effects were never properly studied." The words settled between us like ash. "Does that mean—" "They don't know," he interrupted gently. "No one does." Fear returned then, not as accusation, but as vulnerability. I found myself watching Aaron more closely, counting his breaths when he slept, noticing the way he winced when he stood up too quickly. Love took on a new sharpness, edged with worry. The investigation uncovered more than anyone expected. Documents surfaced proving that the program had continued longer than officially acknowledged, that some participants had been moved, their identities altered, their records split across multiple systems to prevent tracing. Aaron's lineage hadn't just been hidden, it had been rewritten. One afternoon, a woman knocked on our door. She introduced herself as Claire. She had the same eyes as Daniel. "I think I'm his sister," she said simply. We sat in the living room stunned as she explained how she'd found us, through the article, through shared genetic markers, through a years-long search for something that felt missing. She was a few years younger than Aaron, raised in another state, told a different version of the same half-story. "I always felt like I was part of something I couldn't see," she said. "When I read about him, it clicked." Aaron stared at her, tears welling in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Neither do I, but I think we're supposed to try." They took a DNA test together. The results confirmed it. Siblings separated by design. Watching them talk, tentative at first, then animated as they discovered shared habits and gestures, I felt a strange sense of expansion. Our family was growing in unexpected directions, not shaped by choice, but by truth finally allowed to breathe. But not all responses were kind. Online comments turned cruel. People accused Aaron of seeking attention, of exaggerating harm, of dragging an innocent child into controversy. I stopped reading after someone suggested Daniel would be better off not knowing what he is. The words lodged in my chest like glass. One evening, overwhelmed, I snapped at Aaron over something trivial. He looked at me surprised, and I broke down. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm scared of what this does to him, to us." He pulled me into his arms. "I know," he said, "but imagine if we'd stayed silent. Imagine him finding out later, alone." That thought chilled me more than any threat. The legal side grew heavier. Class action suits were discussed, settlements hinted at, non-disclosure agreements floated like bait. Aaron was offered money in exchange for silence, enough to secure Daniel's future comfortably. We sat at the table, staring at the paperwork. "This could make things easier," I said quietly. "It would make things quieter," Aaron corrected, "not easier." He pushed the papers away. "I won't sell the truth, not again." I admired him for that, even as fear tightened my chest. Doing the right thing doesn't come with guarantees. It comes with consequences. As winter approached, the world outside slowed, but our lives didn't. More siblings came forward, support groups formed, a community built itself around shared loss and shared resilience. Aaron found purpose in it, even as it exhausted him. One night, after a long meeting, he sat beside Daniel's bed and watched him sleep. "Whatever they tried to make me," he whispered to me later, "this is what I choose." I realized then that identity isn't just inherited or engineered, it's claimed. And sometimes claiming it means standing in the fire long enough to make space for others. Still, the hardest part was yet to come, because truth doesn't just demand to be told. Sometimes it demands to be answered. The subpoena arrived in a plain white envelope, delivered on a morning so ordinary it felt almost cruel. Daniel was eating cereal at the counter, humming to himself, while Aaron scanned the mail absently. When he saw the seal, his face tightened. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down slowly, like his legs had decided for him. "They want me to testify," he said finally. My stomach dropped. "When?" "Soon," he replied, "and not just about the program, about the people involved, the decisions, the money." That was the moment the story stopped feeling like ours and started feeling like history being written in real time. Testifying meant names. It meant consequences for people who had spent decades making sure there were none. It meant stepping into rooms where power had a long memory and very little patience. The weeks leading up to the hearing were some of the hardest of my life. Aaron practiced his testimony with lawyers who reminded him to stick to facts, to avoid emotion, to protect himself. But how do you strip emotion from a life shaped by secrets? How do you talk about your own existence as if it were evidence? At home, we tried to keep things normal for Daniel. We baked cookies. We built towers out of blocks. We laughed when they fell. But there was an undercurrent to everything now, a quiet awareness that our time together felt precious in a new way. Not because we were in danger exactly, but because something irreversible was approaching. The night before the hearing, Aaron couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. "What if they make me sound ungrateful?" he asked. "What if they say I owe my life to them?" "You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your identity." He nodded, but I could see the doubt linger. People like to believe that outcomes justify methods, that harm is acceptable if the result looks good on paper. Aaron was living proof that it wasn't that simple. The hearing room was cold and bright, all sharp lines and polished surfaces. I sat behind Aaron, watching his back straighten as he took the oath. When he spoke, his voice was steady, even when his hands trembled slightly. He talked about his childhood, the gaps in his medical history, the fear he'd felt when he saw his son's blue eyes and realized something fundamental had been hidden from him. One of the lawyers asked, Would you say your life has been successful? Aaron paused. By whose definition? He asked quietly. If success means being healthy, informed, and free to choose who I am, then no, not until recently. There was a murmur in the room. I held my breath. Another lawyer tried a different angle. If this program hadn't existed, you wouldn't be here. Isn't that true? Aaron looked him straight in the eye. If my parents hadn't existed, I wouldn't be here either. That doesn't give anyone the right to lie to me. Something shifted then. I could feel it. The narrative they wanted of grateful subjects and benevolent visionaries cracked under the weight of his words. When it was over, Aaron looked drained but resolute. Outside, reporters crowded around, shouting questions. He answered a few, then stopped. I've said what I needed to say. The rest is up to you. The fallout was swift. More institutions were named, more records unsealed, lawsuits multiplied. The public conversation changed tone, shifting from curiosity to outrage. People started asking harder questions about consent, about ethics, about the long shadow of experiments conducted without accountability. At home, the pressure intensified. We received messages from people thanking Aaron for his courage and others blaming him for opening old wounds. One email stood out, written by a man who claimed to have funded part of the program. It was brief and chilling. You don't understand what you're dismantling. Some structures exist for a reason. Aaron deleted it without a word, but I saw his shoulders tense. Claire visited more often during that time. She and Aaron talked late into the night, comparing memories, piecing together a shared past from fragments. Watching them was bittersweet. There was joy in connection, but also grief for all the years lost to silence. One evening, Claire asked me, "Do you ever wish you hadn't started this?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said, "but I wish it didn't hurt so much." She nodded. "Truth does that," she said, "but lies rot." Daniel, meanwhile, was growing fast, asking more questions, noticing more. One afternoon, he looked up at Aaron and said, "Why do people talk about you on the computer?" Aaron crouched down to his level. "Because Daddy told a story, and stories make people think." "Is it a bad story?" Daniel asked. Aaron smiled gently. "It's a true one." That seemed to satisfy him, at least for now, but I knew the day would come when we'd have to tell him more, when we'd have to explain why his eyes were different, why his family tree had extra branches, why his father had chosen truth even when it was hard. The legal battles dragged on, slow and grinding. Settlements were reached, apologies issued, some sincere, others carefully worded. A fund was created for those affected, meant to cover medical monitoring and counseling. It felt like a start, though nothing could fully undo what had been done. One night, months later, Aaron and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. "Do you think it was worth it?" he asked. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Ask me again in 10 years, I said. "But right now, yes." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't feel broken anymore," he said finally. "I feel chosen by myself." I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. That was the difference, I realized. The program had tried to define him before he could speak. Now he was defining himself. Still, one piece of the story remained unfinished, a truth we hadn't yet shared with the person it mattered most to. And I knew that when that moment came, it would test us in ways no courtroom ever could.
We had always known this conversation was coming. We just didn't know when courage would outweigh fear. Daniel was almost 7 by then, old enough to notice patterns, old enough to sense when adults softened their voices around certain topics. He'd started asking questions that lingered in the air long after they were asked, questions about family trees at school, questions about why his father went to meetings and sometimes came home looking tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. One evening, after dinner, He sat cross-legged on the living room floor, drawing with crayons. He looked up suddenly and said, "Daddy, why do my eyes look different from yours?" Aaron froze. I felt my chest tighten, but I met his eyes and nodded slightly. This was it. There would never be a perfect moment, only an honest one. Aaron sat down on the floor across from him. "They're different," he said gently, "but different doesn't mean wrong." Daniel considered this. "Kids at school say they're special," he said. "One boy said they're not from our family." The words hit harder than I'd expected. Aaron took a slow breath. "Do you want to know a secret?" he asked. Daniel's eyes widened. He nodded eagerly. "This is a grown-up secret," Aaron continued, "but it's also your story, and it belongs to you." I moved closer, sitting beside them. Aaron explained carefully, choosing words that wouldn't frighten but wouldn't lie. He talked about how families are made in different ways, how sometimes people help make families without meaning to cause harm, how long ago, before Daniel was born, mistakes were made that affected a lot of people. Daniel listened quietly, his crayon forgotten in his hand. "So my eyes come from you," Daniel said slowly, "but also from other people?" Aaron smiled softly. "Yes, from history, from choices, but mostly they come from you being you." Daniel frowned. "Did someone do something bad to you?" The question surprised us both. Aaron didn't deflect it. "They did something wrong," he said, "and for a long time they didn't tell the truth about it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Is that why people talk about you?" "Yes," Aaron replied, "because I told the truth when I found out." Daniel nodded, absorbing this. "I'm glad you did," he said simply. I felt tears spill over then, quiet and unstoppable. Children have a way of cutting through the noise to what matters most. "Does this mean I'm not really your son?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice small. Aaron reached for him immediately, pulling him into his arms. "No," he said firmly, "it means you're exactly my son. Nothing changes that." Daniel hugged him back, tight and unquestioning. "Okay," he said, "then I like my eyes." That night, after Daniel was asleep, Aaron and I sat in the dark, holding hands. "That was easier than I imagined," he said. I nodded, "because we didn't wait until shame told the story for us." Still, I knew this was only the beginning for Daniel. Understanding evolves with age. What felt simple now would grow more complex as he did. But we'd given him something important: truth without fear, identity without secrecy. In the months that followed, life slowly found a new rhythm. The investigations wrapped up, settlements were finalized, the media attention faded, replaced by quieter work: advocacy, counseling, building networks for families affected like ours. Aaron spoke less publicly now, choosing instead to mentor others who were just discovering their own hidden origins. Claire became a regular presence in our lives. She brought a sense of extended family Daniel took to naturally, calling her Aunt Claire without hesitation. Watching them together filled me with a bittersweet sense of what had been lost and what was still possible. One afternoon, Daniel came home with a school project, a family tree drawn in bright colors. It had more branches than most, names written carefully in uneven letters. He handed it to Aaron proudly. "I made extra space," he said, "in case we find more people." Aaron laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded. "That's a good idea," he said. Looking at that drawing, I realized something profound. The secret that once threatened to tear us apart had expanded our definition of family instead. It had forced us to confront fear, yes, but also to practice radical honesty, to choose connection over comfort. Later that night, Aaron asked me if I ever think about that first moment when he yelled. I did, often. "Yes," I said, "but not the way I used to." "What do you see now?"
I see a man who was terrified of losing himself and a family strong enough to survive the truth. He nodded. I was so sure blue eyes meant betrayal. I didn't realize they were pointing me back to myself. That was the cruel irony of it all. The thing he feared most wasn't my betrayal. It was his erased history demanding to be seen. Years from now, Daniel will ask deeper questions about ethics, about consent, about what it means to exist because of someone else's ambition. When that day comes, we won't hide. We'll sit with him the way we did that night on the floor, and we'll tell him the truth as best we understand it then. Because lies may feel protective, but they always come due. And truth, even when dangerous, gives us something lies never can: choice. Our family wasn't destroyed by blue eyes. It was rebuilt by them.
Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges without erasing the scars. Years passed, not quietly, but steadily, and with each one, our family grew more settled inside the truth we once feared would destroy us. Daniel grew taller, louder, more opinionated. His blue eyes never faded into the background the way I once hoped they might. Instead, they became simply his. No longer symbols, no longer triggers, just part of the boy who loved science books, hated peas, and asked questions that stopped adults mid-sentence. Aaron changed too, in ways that were subtle at first and then unmistakable. The tightness he used to carry in his shoulders loosened. He laughed more easily. He spoke about himself with a kind of ownership that hadn't been there before, like he'd finally been handed the deed to his own life. He still carried anger sometimes, at the people who made decisions without consent, at the years stolen by silence, but it no longer ruled him. The advocacy work slowed as the world's attention moved on, but it didn't disappear. Systems rarely fix themselves all at once. Progress came in small, stubborn steps. New regulations, better transparency, support networks that didn't exist before. Aaron didn't need headlines anymore. Helping one confused adult at a time felt more meaningful than standing at a podium. One evening, years after that first confrontation, we found ourselves back in the same living room where everything had cracked open. The furniture had changed, the walls were a different color, but the light fell the same way, soft and revealing. Daniel, now older, sat on the couch scrolling through something on his tablet. "Dad," he said casually, "did you know there are people online who think genetics decide everything about who you are?" Aaron smiled faintly. "Some people believe that," he said. Daniel looked up, thoughtful. "I don't think they're right." "No?" I asked. He shrugged. "If that were true, you wouldn't choose to be kind, you'd just be it." Aaron and I exchanged a look. That was it right there. The lesson we'd hoped would land, landing without being forced. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, Aaron and I sat on the porch again, just like we had years ago, older now, steadier. The air was quiet, peaceful in a way that felt earned. "I used to think my life started the day I found out the truth," Aaron said, "like everything before that didn't count." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think it all counts, even the lies, especially the moment they stopped." I thought back to that night, the yelling, the accusation, the way his voice cracked when he saw Daniel's eyes and felt something ancient stir. I remembered the fear in his face, the way it masqueraded as anger. If I'm honest, that moment still lived in me, but it no longer hurt the way it once did. "We could have broken that night," I said quietly. "Yes," he agreed, "and sometimes I think we almost wanted to. Breaking feels easier than rebuilding. But we stayed. We stayed." That, I realized, was the real miracle. Not the exposure of a secret, not the dismantling of a corrupt program, not even the justice that followed. It was the decision to remain present with one another when leaving would have been simpler, when fear told us to retreat, when silence promised comfort. The truth didn't save us on its own. We saved ourselves by choosing what to do with it. Years later, Daniel would write an essay for school about identity. He asked us if we wanted to read it before he turned it in.
We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where envelopes and letters once brought dread instead of curiosity. His handwriting was messy, but confident. I used to think identity is something you find out. Now I think it's something you practice. My family taught me that. I had to step away after that, overwhelmed in the best possible way. The secret that once threatened to erase us had somehow taught our child how to stand. Aaron found me later, eyes shining. "Whatever they tried to make me," he said softly, repeating words he'd spoken long ago, "this is what we made instead." And that is the part of the story I wish more people understood. The danger wasn't the truth. The danger was believing we couldn't survive it. Secrets grow powerful in the dark. They feed on fear, on shame, on the hope that silence will protect us. But silence doesn't protect. It delays. And when the truth finally surfaces, it demands more than honesty. It demands courage, accountability, and compassion. Our family learned that identity isn't ruined by revelation, it's refined by it. Blood may carry information, but love carries meaning. And while the past shapes us, it doesn't get the final word. I sometimes think about other families standing on the edge of their own truths, afraid of what they'll lose if they speak. I wish I could tell them this. The ground will shake, yes. Some things will fall. But what remains will be real. And real things, though imperfect, are strong. The night Marin yelled, "Get out," felt like the end of our story. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a harder, braver chapter, one where fear was named, secrets were confronted, and a child with blue eyes taught us how to see clearly.